Uh, Senator, could you enlighten us a bit on why we have a problem, if we have a problem, and how is it deleterious to our democracy in South Carolina?
Well, we have a big problem. And as has been said by so many people before, the politicians are picking the voters, not the voters picking the politicians. That's a cliche, but it is a true statement. I started in 1980, so I participated in 5 reapportionments, and I watched kind of an evolution. To begin with, when I got there in 82, I saw a lot of individuals, I should say some individuals, that spent hours in the map rooms trying to design their own personal districts, Democrats and Republicans. But by the year 2000, it was the parties themselves who were trying to design the districts to both protect their incumbents and to maximize their impact of their voters. You've heard the notion that less than a majority of the voters elect more than a majority of the members of the House and Senate. That can be done by putting a lot of people we think of as Democratic voters in one district, let's say 80%, based on previous voting history. And then what you do is you put 55% of Republicans into a district, making it winnable, but not wasting votes. But I saw it made into a fine art. The senators represent approximately 100,000 people per district. House members are somewhere around 40,000. But those districts are gerrymandered terribly, so that if you showed a map of South Carolina with, let's say, the Senate districts, and you asked someone who was not aware of what was going on, what this district represented, they would say a kindergartner with a crayon, because it makes no sense geographically. It makes no sense in terms of common interests of communities. For example, the district I used to represent now has a part of Sumter County, a part of Lee County, a part of Kershaw County, and a part of Richland County. Tell me where the common interest is. There is none. So it's designed specifically, not so much for the district I used to represent as it is for people who neighbor that district, so that you can get more, in this case, Republican districts. As people in elective office, what we really like is safe districts where we'll have no opposition. That's the easiest election to win, a district where there's no opposition. I always thought, call me a romantic, that the best district was a balanced district where you had to talk to all the voters and all the voters could talk to you and you would listen. The point is that what we need is the most objective group we can get to design districts with the charge that the district should be competitive. Having been involved in 5 reapportionments, I can tell you that it is driven primarily by, first, partisan interest, keeping the majority or trying to gain the majority, and second, personal partisan interest, trying to keep a safe district for yourself. And that's a shame. But when we have members of the body drawing the districts, you get districts that don't represent anything but partisan or partisan personal interest.
Senator Leventis.
Yes.
The current legislature, it was elected in 2018. There was a Senate and House race then, but the House composition hasn't changed parties. So the partisan divide was determined in 2018 by 8.6% of the voters who elected a majority of the legislature in the Republican primary. And I would like your comments on the coarsening of political dialogue, the capability of addressing common problems, and as importantly, the diminution of participation. In Sumter County, we're looking at voter education for young Black people, trying to get them engaged and participating. In general, the older Black population is voting about 52% of the time in a 4-year cycle. But in Sumter County, there were 5,436 people under 24 in the 2018 election, and only 810 of them, 14%, voted. And so what's happening? I mean, is democracy is not working, and what has it done to the dialogue and the ability of the legislature to address critical problems?
Well, of course, it's divided the legislature along partisan lines, and that is not good. And the one of the good things that's happened in the legislature since I first started is the increase in the number of women in the legislature. The least partisan forum I enjoyed being a member of was the Legislative Women's Caucus. I went there, and there I heard less about partisanship and more about issues than in any other place I went. So I think it's positive when you get more women involved. But I think that it's just human nature and political survival nature that if you know you have a very small base of people who actually come out and vote, that you must, and I'll use an emotional word, you must pander to that base. And that's not good. That's not good. I had Democratic friends who thought I was a Republican. I had Republican friends who thought I was crazy. That's great. If there's a nonpartisan group charged with the basic tenet of making as many districts as possible based on voting histories competitive, then I think we will make progress. Just like everything else in our country, it won't happen quickly. But I think if you do your studies in states like Iowa and others where they have this nonpartisan redistricting, you'll find that districts do become more competitive and that politicians, which is a positive thing, by the way, people in public office serving, I think are good people, whether I agree with them or not. But politicians will find it necessary to engage a broader group. If you want to simplify it, you could say that some politicians only have to go to church on Sunday and other politicians only have to go to civic clubs. Well, I think the best politician would be one that goes to both.
Senator Leventis, we appreciate your leadership on this issue, and we do have a plan for Fair Maps, and the Fair Maps campaign is going to be working hard to deliver Richland County to show people what we're talking about. We can't anticipate that the legislature is going to vote to give up power, and the courts have ruled that that's not their business to stop partisan gerrymandering, even though it looks racial. And so we really do have racially segregated districts in South Carolina with a majority, a permanent majority of white legislators. And we're not making this up. The Republican Party is the majority party. They will have the final vote on drawing the lines for the next decade, for 2020. And so we do appreciate your participation as somebody with experience, and you're willing to stand up and speak about democracy. And
now, let me throw this in. I've seen the plan. I've worked over the plan, and I've talked with you about it and many others. It is a grand plan. It is a plan that can work. But everything in politics takes work. So the idea that this is a plan that is right and good is not enough to win the day. It's a plan that can compel legislators to take a vote on it. Nobody can compel legislators how to vote except their constituents. So this plan will work because it will be generated by the constituents asking for fair maps. Those two words completely encapsulate all the plan is designed to do. It's not designed for Democrats. It's not designed for Republicans. Actually, it's designed for voters who want to be heard but think they can't be because of only having one person to vote for an election. So this Fair Maps plan can and will work. But here's a curveball that most of you haven't thought about, and it only dawned on me because of what we talked about earlier. Yes, before the 2022 election, there will be a reapportionment for the House Representatives and the Senate. But don't forget what happened in 2002 and 2003. The House of Representatives was reapportioned and ran in 2002 under the new reapportionment. The state Senate was reapportioned, but before the 2004 election, it was reapportioned again. So it's not unthinkable that if the public really gets behind this and gets their county council to try to compel the state legislature to vote on it, and it does go on the ballot, it's not unthinkable that there could be another reapportionment before 2030. And as I look at turning 75 this year, I hope I'm around in 2030 to see that reapportionment and that it will be done in fair maps. But it would be much easier for a person like me if that reapportionment was done in 2024, 2026, and put all legislators on notice that under the new plan, the incumbent as well as the challenger has to talk with everybody in the district, has to have ideas that would be acceptable to the majority of the district, not just the majority of the Republicans or the Democrats, or even worse, the majority of only the Democrats or the Republicans who vote, which is what we have now. And that tracks those numbers you gave earlier, where 8-point-something% elected a majority of the legislature, because most ran without opposition, and the ones who did have opposition generated those small number of votes.
Well, Senator Leventis, we are going to shoot for seeing a constitutional amendment in 2022. And it's important that you pointed out that there is no law that requires only one reapportionment during a particular decade. And so we have more than one bite at the apple, and the legislation for the Citizen Redistricting Commission and the legislation for the joint resolution for a constitutional amendment just speaks to putting it on a general election ballot. And so we're going to keep that fight going until we win. And I think that it's really important to underscore, and I believe you did, that we can win this. It may take a while, but many people are aware of the fact how long it took for people of color to even be able to vote in this state. And now we want to make the people that believe in democracy be able to have a coalition of people that understand that they share needs like healthcare and education, and that everybody's got potholes. Potholes aren't partisan, but that we can have competitive elections that deal with the problems that most of us face. Then we can argue about the things we disagree with. So, Senator Leventis, we're looking forward to your leadership on this issue, and we really do appreciate your service. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brett, for coming to my house today, and I hope to see you and Becky soon.
Thank you, sir. Representative Cobb-Hunter, when you introduced the legislation to create a Citizens Redistricting Commission, you also introduced a joint resolution for a constitutional amendment to let the people vote on creating a Citizens Redistricting Commission that would draw the lines as opposed to the politicians. Why did you do that? Why do we need this amendment?
Well, Brett, I did that because I'm a realist and I understand the process. And without going into too much detail, the point of the resolution, quite frankly, is to use the statutory authority of citizens to compel their local governments, their local county councils, to compel the legislature to do it differently. And why am I doing that? In the past, we have had two options when it comes to redistricting and drawing of lines. We have had the General Assembly and the process that we all go through with the redistricting. The other, South Carolina is very familiar with the other, and that is the courts. Because in the time that I've been in the legislature, the courts have been involved in the drawing of lines. And so the whole point of the constitutional amendment is being realistic about the chances of the majority of the General Assembly, which is controlled by the Republican Party and has been for years now. Chances of them drawing maps that are going to be favorable to Democrats are not likely, given our previous history and the redistricting efforts that we've had. We're also seeing a court that is becoming less and less sensitive to issues raised by people of color and those folk who are concerned about representation. of the entire district as opposed to segments of the district. And so for me and the coalition, the Fair Maps Coalition that I have been working with, it made sense to say, okay, Plan A is General Assembly, Plan B would be the courts. Let's go to Plan C, which would be the citizens. And we have at the Progressive Network and as a part of the Fair Maps Coalition, been working at the local level for a while now, trying to get movement where we've got people out there working, getting signatures on petitions so that they can present them to their county councils. Now, of course, the pandemic has put a damper on the level of, or on the pace of that activity, but that is still our plan, the Fair Maps Coalition. We don't have as much confidence in the General Assembly and certainly not in the courts that we could have. And so we've decided to take this route because, again, you have to look at what will work. We've tried those other two options, and the statutory authority at the local level is not one that we tried. And so we're going to try this one and see if we can have an impact, because the bottom line is that things have to change. People ought to have choices. And the reality is that here in South Carolina, like in many states, voters simply don't have choices. They don't. Competition is not something that is a part of legislative races, state legislative races. And that's not good for democracy. It's not good for the system. It's not good for legislators, because you tend to focus on just a small segment. There are very few of us who take the state, quote unquote, part of legislator and recognize that that means you ought to be concerned about the entire state, as opposed to a few people in a House district or a Senate district. And things have got to change. And this is one way that the Fair Maps Coalition has identified as a potential to change things.
Representative Cobb-Hunter, we really do appreciate not only your presence in the legislature, but your leadership in trying to make South Carolina a more civilized place to live. And in the interest of full disclosure, I want to say that that Gilda is somebody that helped us start the Progressive Network. She was elected in 1992. She is the longest serving incumbent right now. She's also the longest serving woman in history in the South Carolina legislature and the longest serving person of color. And
just a little
now,
social worker.
right now, the conscience of the South Carolina legislature since the loss of our dear friend and Gilda's sweet mate for so many years, Representative Joe Neal.
Yeah, look, just a little social worker trying to do good. That's it.
And we do thank